YouTube, how the duck you doing? DuckFilms here, and today we're tackling one of the hottest topics in Marvel Rivals, and that is how to counter the new meta heroes in Season 1. If you're tired of getting steamrolled by these top tier picks, stick around because I've got the tools and strategies you need to turn the tide. And do me a favor, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. We're trying to hit 10,000 subscribers so I can become a Marvel Rivals partner so that I can host a whole bunch of giveaways. But without further ado, let's get started. Now with all that being said, who are currently the Season 1 meta picks? Now little to no surprise, one of the top meta picked characters is actually Wolverine. Now with Season 1, he's seen both a nerf and a buff in recent changes. Now all of these changes in general made a net positive for Wolverine, particularly during his second cycle in combat where the extra HP compensates when his cooldown isn't available after initial engage. Now initially, players didn't really understand or they underestimated the true power and impact of Wolverine as a character in Marvel Rivals. Now in a high level play, tank players are constantly in fear, as Wolverine can continuously kidnap tanks and shred them down in a matter of seconds. Now this is all because his damage scales with max HP, allowing him to shred tanks efficiently. Moreover, Wolverine is particularly effective against the new hero, Mr. Fantastic, making him a nightmare for many tank heavy strategies. This dominance often forces players in high elo matches to abandon the double tank setup entirely. Not only is Wolverine incredibly strong, but he also is meta defining. How do we counter this low gain? How do we stop this incredible force of a man? Now first and foremost, there's a couple things to keep in mind. Wolverine needs to get up very close to the enemy to get anything out of his limited toolkit. Now if he does, he's devastating, so you have to do everything in your power to make sure that doesn't happen. Now range is your friend again, so try and drop him early at a distance to start racking up the kills. So one of my best recommendations if you're playing a Vanguard or a tank in Marvel Rivals and you're playing against a Wolverine, someone like Magneto is definitely a solid counter against him, because if you or your teammate gets kidnapped by Wolverine, you can simply shield yourself or shield your ally that's getting kidnapped. This gives you a higher chance of survival. Even though it's not a 100% flawless strategy, it is something that you can still do. Now if you're not playing a Vanguard character and you're playing a duelist or a damage dealer and you want to counter Wolverine and stop him from being a nuisance to your team, there are a couple picks. There of course is Black Widow, who can maintain distance poking him from afar, but Black Widow isn't the best pick necessarily because she'll pretty much die to everything else. Now on the other hand, you could pick Hawkeye, who could easily shred down Wolverine with a couple headshots or at least do enough damage to proc his passive ability right away. Now if you're not particularly good at aiming against a character like Wolverine who can move pretty fast, you can use a character like Iron Man to maintain height and to do quite significant damage from afar. Now do be warned, Wolverine can get into high spots and can still definitely cause a problem to you, but it's still going to be a lot harder for him to reach you. Now if you can't maintain that distance like Black Widow or Hawkeye, you can certainly pick a character like Punisher. Now even though his shotgun was a bit nerfed, if Wolverine jumps on top of you as Punisher and you whip out that shotgun, it only takes a few shots of that shotgun to the head to drop Wolverine quite quickly. Now if you're playing a strategist or a healer or support, whatever you want to classify it as, and you just can't seem to escape Wolverine or do enough healing to save your team, try picking a character like Adam Warlock. Adam Warlock has a couple very useful tools. One is soulbound. You can soulbind yourself to the tanks, so if they are getting jumped by Wolverine, even though you're taking some damage, your tanks on the other hand hopefully are not getting shredded fast enough to break that bond. You can also use Loki to drop a doppelganger on top of your tank that's getting jumped and then instantly drop a domain on one of your tanks so that all of Wolverine's damage is completely negated. Now another solid strategist pick is Mantis. Mantis can use her sleep on Wolverine to try to quickly get him out of the fight, as well as her ultimate and her speed makes her a great counter for Wolverine. And that's basically how you can counter Wolverine to a core. Although it's not a flawless or perfect strategy, it's still a lot better to have some sort of a plan than nothing. Our next meta character has to be hands down Cloak and Dagger. Now this character was already one of the strongest supports in the entire game, but then they decided to give her a massive buff. Her healing dome cooldown was reduced from 15 seconds to 12, which means significantly more uptime. Additionally, her ultimate allows her to dash 4 times instead of 3. Now let me tell you, this character was already strong. They were practically the bane of my existence, but with these changes it's become apparent that this character is absolutely dominating. Now all the changes made to the other supports as well to give you an even better reason to choose her over other options, and players who are already maining Cloak and Dagger are definitely enjoying this. Now with all that being said, there's no perfect character in Marvel Rivals, and as such Cloak and Dagger definitely has some counters. Now the key to beating Cloak and Dagger is catching them when they're vulnerable. Specifically, you want to target them when they're in Dagger form, so that's when they're in the female form, and even more so when their escape abilities are on cooldown. Now another way is after they use the healing bubble or the Dagger storm, or if they use Cloak's shroud ability. They are much easier to take down when those two abilities are gone. Now their abilities do have relatively long cooldowns, so if they do waste them them or use them, that's your chance to strike. Now with that being said, there are some characters that countered them very well. Now for some vanguards that do counter Cloak and Dagger, the first one is none other than Captain America. Now Captain America fares extremely well with Cloak and Dagger because he has the ability to really run her down. And let me tell you, there's really no escaping Captain America once he has his sights on you. Now another good counter is Groot by walling off her lines of sights to heal teammates, and if she throws, her healing storm, it is a projectile, so it can be stopped by Groot's walls. Of course, this is all if it's timed, perfectly, but in a way, it definitely is a counter. Now, another decent Vanguard counter is in fact Venom. Venom can quite easily jump on Cloak and Dagger, especially if she's out of her escape abilities, and he kind of just sits there as a sponge, soaking up all the healing that could be going to her teammates, but instead it's going to you as damage. Following that, we have a couple duelists that are very solid against Cloak and Dagger. The first one being none other than Spider-Man. Spider-Man can easily dive the backline and catch Cloak and Dagger out of position, while on the other hand, Hawkeye in his long-range damage can force Cloak and Dagger to use her defensive abilities quite early. Now Black Panther in his high mobility allows him to chase down and eliminate Cloak and Dagger quite easily. Now the same could be said with Psylocke. She has similar tools to Black Panther to help her get past the front line and pressure the supports directly. Now hopefully that gives you a bit of a better understanding of how to deal with Cloak and Dagger in the current meta for Season 1. Now coming to one of our first vanguards, one character currently is receiving a ton of attention, and that is none other than the God of Thunder himself, Thor. Now in my opinion, Thor remains one of the highest carry potential characters in the game, and he's definitely a very strong vanguard in the right hands, so much so that he's become probably one of the top choices for off tanks currently. Now Thor also received some changes. Now he did get a small HP boost. Again, it was only a 25 increase in his total HP, so definitely not a huge boost. However, while he's using his ultimate, he is now immune to crowd control effects. Previously, any form of crowd control like Venom Slam, Hook, or Boop, or Sleep, whatever you want to call it, would completely cancel his ultimate. Now because of this, he's a lot stronger than he previously was, and he's definitely now one of the better off tanks and a solid meta pick choice. But if you're having trouble with him, here's how you can get around it. Now although Thor is strong and powerful and close to mid-range combat, he is super vulnerable to long-range attacks. That means characters with the best long-range attacks, such as Hela, Iron Man, Storm, Hawkeye, Black Widow, are effective in countering the mighty Thor. Now on the flip side, if you're getting up close and personal with Thor, a really solid duelist pick has definitely got to be Punisher. I say this because Punisher's shotgun up close can really melt any tank. Now although like I stated previously, even though it got nerfed, it still is a major threat to any tank that's up close. So generally speaking, the best way to counter Thor is to keep him at range. And if you're finding this video useful so far, make sure to subscribe. Now another duelist that's becoming a lot more prominent, especially in higher elo with the meta, definitely has to be Winter Soldier, otherwise known as Bucky. Now Winter Soldier received some major changes for Season 1, making him do a lot more damage up close and giving him a lot more survivability. Now why is he so prominent in the current meta? Well, first and foremost, he's a tank Punisher just like Wolverine. He has the ability to hook one enemy into your entire team, and everyone on your team and their mother will be able to shred that one target down quite quickly. Now he's also really good at shutting down flankers like Psylocke, Black Panther, because he has a ton of crowd control options, that being with his hook, slam, uppercut, and much more. Now they increase his base HP and health regen to make him significantly harder to duel, especially for assassins and burst heavy characters. Now previously there was characters to counter him with, that being like Black Panther, Hela, and Hawkeye, but all of those characters received some slight nerfs. That being said, he still has some pretty solid counters you can exploit. Now because of the changes, he still has a rather large weakness to long distance damage dealers. Now even though Hela and Hawkeye did receive somewhat of a nerf, they are still very excellent at taking out Winter Soldier by dealing still a ton of poke damage from range. By using those characters, you can make anyone playing Winter Soldier a living nightmare. Now more counters are, if you're playing a Vanguard like Doctor Strange, Magneto, and you shield, you can block his ulti so it doesn't hit your team, and you can also use Groot to break his line of sight onto your team, or if Winter Soldier were to initiate onto your team, you could essentially wall him off from his team. So pretty straightforward. Now believe it or not, another character that's becoming a lot more prominent is actually Rocket Raccoon. Now I've always thought this hero was, decent, but especially after the changes in Season 1, he's becoming picked a lot more, especially in higher elos. Now let me just give you a better understanding. Rocket Raccoon has emerged as a top tier support character, especially at high skill levels. Now initially he was perceived as weak despite having one of the highest win rates. Recent balance changes have shifted the meta in Rocket's favor. Nerfs to other supports like Mantis, coupled with Rocket's increased HP, have significantly boosted his viability. Now one key advantage is Rocket's ability to charge ultimates a lot faster, which pairs exceptionally well with Punisher and Winter Soldier. Now additionally, some nerfs to dive characters like Psylocke and Black Panther, who could counter counter Rocket's BRB, that's the respawn beacon or the object that gives you, bonus health and the jump boost. Now, all of these changes has made his BRB ability more valuable, while also counters like Hela and Hawkeye are now less threatening due to their own nerfs. But luckily, there still is a way to get rid of this trash panda in your game. Now, the key to shutting down a Rocket Raccoon lies in exploiting his fundamental weakness. With low HP, he's incredibly fragile and relies entirely on maintaining a safe distance. While his mobility might seem impressive at first, it becomes predictable once you understand his limitations. He only has 2 jetpack dashes on a 6-second cooldown, and his wall climbing ability forces him to take relatively linear paths. The best way to counter Rocket is to track his dash usage. Once he burns both charges, he becomes significantly more vulnerable. His minigun also has a clear weakness. He struggles to hit targets at range, especially if they're moving erratically. So the best way when closing the gap on Rocket Raccoon, move unpredictably and use cover to avoid his shots. Now, another critical weakness is his Battle Rebirth Beacon, or BRB for short. While it can revive teammates, the beacon itself can be destroyed. Whenever you see Rocket place this beacon, make it a priority target. This removes both his team's revival safety net and their source of armor packs. Now, some solid counters to Rocket Raccoon. Even though a couple of these characters were nerfed, they're still pretty solid counters. One of his biggest counters by far is Spider-Man. His web swinging mobility lets him easily chase down Rocket while avoiding minigun fire. Black Panther can quickly close the gap and pressure Rocket out of position, while Psylocke invisibility makes it impossible for Rocket to maintain a safe distance. Venom's high survivability means he can tank through healing while pursuing Rocket. Now, you'll definitely be shocked to see this one, but Black Widow is definitely a counter. You can easily take Rocket Raccoon down from a distance with just a headshot. Now, this could also be said for a Hawkeye as well. Now, Punisher can easily melt through Rocket Raccoon quite easily, especially when he is in his turret form. So the best way to really counter Rocket Raccoon is just catch him off guard when he's down abilities with the right heroes. Now, Magneto was already a relatively high or top tier flex tank pick in this game, especially with the current meta favoring crowd control heavy compositions and synergistic playstyles. Now, because of the recent changes, Magneto's barrier interacts well with Psylocke's ultimate, which now targets barriers directly, while as competitors like Strange have been nerfed, making Magneto a much stronger pick by comparison. Now, characters like Bucky and Wolverine who thrive on disrupting enemy positioning are less effective against Magneto. His survivability tools, such as his barrier and self bubble, allow him to escape or mitigate the impact of CC heavy ability. If you didn't know, CC is short for crowd control. Now, the best way to deal with Magneto is by playing around his cooldown. You have to understand that he cannot put the bubble shield on himself and his allies at the same time, since they both have a shared cooldown. This means you can either hit Magneto or his allies, thereby creating openings. Now, never hit an enemy who is protected by Magneto shields, as you'll be providing him with stacks. Finally, stuns are going to be your best friend, as he ends up completely disabled and thereby you can hit him freely. He's also extremely weak against melee heroes, characters like Magic and Thor. Now, there's also quite a few strategists who can deal pretty well with Magneto. The best units for this task are Luna Snow and Mantis, as the former can freeze Magneto while the latter can put him to sleep, thereby creating a lot of openings for your team. Now, Cloak and Dagger is also a pretty good option to face against Magneto, as they can blind him with the terror capability, thereby making it hard for the latter to play effective. Once blinded, he can't really do anything, and he won't really be able to know where to place his shields. And that's pretty much the best way to really counter Magneto. Now, Namor, Namor Jr., however you wanna call him. I'm very bad with pronouncing names, so I apologize for it. Now, if you know me, you know how much I've been gassing up this character. This character, in my eyes, even since closed beta, has been one of my favorite and probably one of the best heroes in my opinion. But why is this character all of a sudden so sought after? Now, one of the reasons why you're picking this character is because he's super effective against dive compositions. He excels at countering mobility-based dive strategies, as well as his burst damage, especially with the Luna Snow synergy, can shut down divers before they even have the chance to capitalize. Now, he also excels at having high burst potential because his squids provide exceptional burst damage and pressure. The alternative fire attack will mark targets to ensure devastating follow-up damage. Now, he also has incredible survivability. Now, the Blessing of the Sea ability, or the ability that puts him into a water bubble, makes him tough to dislodge, allowing him to sustain in fights. This also helps him resist being picked off by any type of enemy dive character, as well as a lot of his previous counters like Hela and Hawkeye have been weakened, making him a little bit more impactful. But how do you counter him after all of these changes? Now, one of Namor Jr.'s biggest weaknesses is his lack of mobility and relatively low health pool. While his Blessing of the Deep ability provides some safety, typically good players will wait for you to use it before engaging. Now, here's some characters that give him the most trouble. Now, for Spider-Man, his mobility lets him quickly close the gap and take out the Monstro spawns. Now, the Monstro spawns are another name for his squids or his turrets. Now, Iron Fist, believe it or not, is another character that excels at dealing with Namor. He can dive past your spawns or your turrets and pressure you directly, with the ability to close gaps quite quickly and just to jump on you, be a nuisance. It can be rather difficult playing into that. Now, even though Black Panther got nerfed, he can still pose a decently large threat. Because of his superior mobility and his quick burst damage, he can be seen as, again, a major threat, escaping quickly out of the turret's range. Now, just as Namor is good at getting rid of Wolverine, Wolverine can also get rid of him pretty easily. Now, Wolverine can close the gap quickly to you and force him to use the Blessing of the Deep ability early. Now, Wolverine still has his Ferocious Leap ability. He can grab Namor and put him in a very bad spot. Now, again, I'm sorry for all the mispronunciations. Now, even though Hawkeye was nerfed, now Hawkeye still outranges any of his turrets that he spawns, allowing him to poke Namor from a distance relatively easy. Now, one Vanguard that definitely excels with dealing with Namor is Venom. Venom can easily dive Namor and can be relatively hard to kite because, again, he doesn't have that much mobility. So the best way to deal with this the best way to deal with this hero is either poke from a range and use ranged abilities to whittle him down, or go for a character that can all in him. If he's not dealt with relatively quickly, he can be quite the nuisance. Now, Adam Warlock didn't actually receive any changes for Season 1, but he's actually starting to become a lot more valuable and is getting picked a whole lot more in higher elo. Now, if players are actually willing to learn his mechanics and positioning, Adam Warlock can become one of the strongest supports, capable of turning the tide of a match. His skill ceiling seems high, but mastering him rewards players with significant game-changing potential. Adam Warlock has an insane burst healing capability. His burst healing is crucial, especially in aggressive plays where enemies can quickly return to full health. Now, as well as the Soul Bond ability, this ability is essential, offering both offensive and defensive benefits, allowing for overwhelming pushes or the ability to counter enemy ultimate. Now, I will say because of all of this, he does have a mechanical skill requirement. Now, to really excel at this character, you have to have, I would say, decent aim, so you can manage both his damage and support roles effectively. Now, you might honestly be wondering, because no one really ever plays him, you don't really know how to counter this character. But luckily for you, I have the know-how. That is, of course, if you subscribe. No, I'm just kidding, you don't have to subscribe. Now, I will say one of the biggest counters about Adam Warlock is purely his mobility. He lacks heavily in mobility compared to any of the other strategists in the entire game. With that being said, characters like Spider-Man and Magic and Black Panther are all exceptional duelists that can easily get rid of Adam Warlock. That being because Adam Warlock really doesn't have any ways to escape. Now, if you're a Vanguard player and you're looking to deal with Adam Warlock, you can simply pick up Venom, because again, due to this strategist's lack of mobility, he is very easy to pick off. Now, I will say when it comes to being Adam Warlock, you can cast as much healing as you can, but if you don't have any teammates around you to help, you are simply delaying the inevitable, because Adam Warlock excels at having teammates around him because of his Soul Bond ability. So in summary, the best way to deal with Adam Warlock is either picking a super fast or highly mobile character, or trying to get Adam Warlock super isolated. This is definitely the best way to deal with him. Now, Venom is a character that I always thought was, a relatively decent tank. I think he did relatively well at absorbing damage and being part of a dive composition. But with the buffs from Season 1, his role in team compositions has even further solidified him. Now, with these buffs, Venom is now harder to kill, especially in situations where you can engage with his ultimate, making him a significant threat in ranked play. Now, with his survivability buffs, Venom is much harder to take down, even against strong dive compositions like Black Panther or Psylocke, making him a dominant pick in more mobility-focused team setups. But I will say that timing and coordination is the key to playing Venom efficiently. You really need to sync your aggressive moves like diving into the fight with your team's ability to follow up, especially if they require line of sight to deal damage or to even heal you. Now, I will say Venom is a little more interesting now with the recent changes. He does have the potential to be a solo tank, though it's definitely not the best to, play him solo. He can still pull it off, but that is only the case when it's a dive heavy composition where he draws attention and absorbs damage, while all the other damage dealing heroes deal damage from a distance. Now, of course, this approach makes him a more viable tank and team engager in various compositions, but of course you have to be careful with your timing and positioning, because if you're not careful, you can get countered quite easily. Magneto is one of the few heroes who can counter Venom's extremely aggressive kit. His Iron Bulwark and Metal Bulwark are the primary counters to Venom, as they block Venom's primary attacks and provide him with rings charging up his mag cannon. Now, if you don't already know, the mag cannon deals massive damage to Venom with higher ring stacks and can even knock him back with a maximum stack. Moreover, Magneto's ultimate, Meteor M, deals devastating damage when successfully cooked up. So additionally, Magneto can remain airborne for a long period of time, making it difficult for Venom to take him down. Now, even though this character was nerfed, Hela is still an excellent counter to Venom. Her medium to long range attacks can deal a significant amount of damage, effectively taking down Venom's massive health bar quite quickly. As well, her Soul Drainer ability can stun Venom if he tries to get too close, making him an easy target for Hela and her team team to take down. Now those characters aren't the only things that can counter him. Any form of hard crowd control abilities can easily counter Venom. That being things like stuns, sleeps, roots, hooks, knockups, anything that will keep him in place for a certain time so your team can shred him down. If you're having trouble dealing with a Venom, you want to pick characters that have some type of crowd control effect, and you kind of just want to stack these abilities on top of one another to try to keep them stun locked and in place. Now with all those characters being said, I think it's fair to also talk about Storm. Now Storm is definitely one of my favorite heroes in all of Marvel Rivals and has gotten a significant buff, so a lot of more players are playing her in ranked. Now furthermore, with all the changes, she's really solidifying herself in the current meta. Now she's played with your team, you're kind of like a support duelist, providing both speed boosts and damage buffs to your team, and she can be quite annoying to play against. Now I didn't really want to give the counters because it's my favorite character, but because of how prominent she is in the current meta, I guess we have to. With that being said, a lot of the counters for Storm are mainly hit scan characters. Characters such as Hela, Star-Lord are very great at taking out Storm. Now you could also say Spider-Man is also a really good counter if that Spider-Man is very good. And another counter is any support ultimate, because Storm's ult cannot go through any of those support ultimates, so she's rather straightforward to counter. And that's how you can essentially deal with all of the current meta heroes and Marvel Rivals for Season 1. Now if you found this video helpful in any way, shape, or form, do me a favor, hit that like and subscribe button. We're pushing for 10,000 subscribers, so you might as well sub. But regardless, I hope you have a great day, and I'll catch you in the next one.